So this is the items that we had on the webinar to talk about establishing a plan and a budget, and I'll kind of hit some of the highlights of features in OpenAir to consider. But I'm really going to get more into the EVM and talk about options that OpenAir provides as an EVM feature. But then many of you have contacted us saying, you know, that's great, the EVM feature is great, but I want more control, and then how can we come up with our version of EVM? So that's what I love doing and love solving, so that is kind of where we'll leave it with how you can combine features and functionality together. Okay. So as we get into project management, there are three real key parts of project management, and those three parts feed into earned value management, sort of understanding how much have you earned of the progress that you're making on the project. So it's a concept of earned value management. I learned that actually when I was in defense contracting with the government. They use this model for sort of, you know, earning revenue, earning progress on projects. And I was happy to see when OpenAir introduced it into their system in around 2008, 2009. But there's lots of ways that people can approach earned value. But the basics of it is that you have to have some kind of budget of effort, a budget of delivery, and then you have to have a timeline associated with that. And those two items together give you your plan. So you have to kind of come up with your plan. Now, the hours tracking in OpenAir, is very, there's a lot of functionality related to this, because the hours can be something that you're just tracking at a project level. You can track it down to the task level, and then you can also track it down to the person who's working on the task level. So I like to call that basic up to advanced. And really, to get the bang for your buck on any kind of earned value management, you have to have at least a task level hours budget plan, or some kind of dimensionality to your budget plan if you're doing your project plan, if you're doing hours at the project level. For those of you using OpenAir right now, you may be using, let's go into the system here really quick. You may be using something simple like the budget hours field on the project form. Okay. The budget hours field is a single field that just says how many hours is this project allocated to deliver. But there's no time dimension on this. There's sort of, it's a total hours. You can't get earned value from this. This is just a single value. You have to have some kind of time dimension. So that's where we introduce tasks often. Tasks give you that ability to put start and end dates on things. Tasks give you the ability to give people hours to put start and end dates on things. But there's another whole feature that I'll introduce, which if you don't want to go to the task level, if that's too granular, that's too much work, you could actually use another feature called the project budget to actually take this, in this example it's 16 hours, but take this 16 hours and add a time dimension to it by simply planning out those hours at the project level using this feature. So at a basic minimum, you have to have some type of timeline for these hours, okay? And that really goes to your schedule. So traditionally schedules, if you think about schedules, I immediately start thinking about Microsoft project plans where there's you know, waterfall or agile activities where there's sprints, and you know, somebody is doing something, starting it here and trying to wrap it up there. And so there's a timeline associated with the work. So OpenAir supports schedules, but you can actually look at schedules a couple of different ways in the system. From a task schedule perspective, you can look at it similar to like a Microsoft project plan where you're doing phases and tasks, and you're giving time dimension to each of those tasks, a start and end time for each of those tasks. And then you're basically building dependencies between tasks so that if one task slips, the other task also slips, and so it's a ripple effect all the way through. That's what I immediately think about when I think about scheduling. Now, there's also another aspect of scheduling in OpenAir, which is resource scheduling and sort of planning people out. And that quite often it may be disassociated from the task plan. It may be handled primarily in the resource module where you're doing bookings and you're scheduling people across time, and you may or may not be relating them down to the task level. It could be the project level. For the purpose of this discussion, to talk about how the earned value feature works in OpenAir, I'm really having to talk about in terms of the native task scheduling functionality, where we're basically putting tasks with a start and end date and creating like a Gantt chart for that project inside the OpenAir system. The EVM functionality, earned value management functionality of OpenAir is tied to these tasks. It's tied to the timeline of the project plan. Okay, but since you have the ability to do custom calculations in the system, one of the things that I'll mention at the end is, well, what if you want your resource schedule to be your plan, not your task layout to be your plan? That can all be handled, and that sort of drives you down the path of writing your own earned value management calculations, which is completely possible to do in the system. You just have to know where to pull the data from. Okay, so the goal of earned value management is not only understanding the budget of hours, but it's also understanding the schedule of those hours across time and the tasks that it's going to take to deliver those hours. So I'm going to talk in terms of the native functionality now, where it connects into these two levels. So task level, and then you can decide whether you want to put hours at the task level or hours per person. Okay. If the way the screen looks a little bit different than your OpenAir system, that's because, whoops, we don't care about that. Let's go back to my OpenAir system here. Okay. That's because we have, let's see right here. We have a feature turned on, which is I think it's Enhanced Project Outline Drag and Drop Gantt View Switch. It's a really long name, but the feature itself gives you the ability to sort of see a graphical Gantt view with the ability to do drag and drop resource scheduling or task scheduling, to be able to link tasks together that are dependent on each other, and so forth. So this basically looks a lot, if you're familiar with Microsoft Project, it looks a lot like Microsoft Project. If you don't have this turned on, this came out, I want to say about 3 years ago, so it's an internal switch to flip it on. Okay. Now, so if you have your task plan with your schedule and you have your hours, then you also want to make sure that you maintain your schedule. So until this feature came out with the Gantt chart, it was a bit of a pain to maintain dates on tasks within OpenAir. This makes it a little bit easier. It's a nicer interface to be able to drag and drop and link. But we do have some tips for you if you're having to maintain your schedules. One tip is make sure that you turn the end date feature on your task. Some of the newer provisioned OpenAir systems have the start and end date fields automatically on the task form. If you don't see an end date on a task form, then it's an internal switch to turn that on. If you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, if I click on this edit task, you can see that when this comes up, I have the ability to set a start and an end date. And this end date is something that has to be enabled. Okay. The other is, as with anything, you want the ability to do mass updates, not just a one by one. The worst thing you could do is force people to click on the name of the task and update 15 tasks by clicking each one open and then editing the dates. So our suggestion is to basically use the worksheet or the grid, it's also known in some systems, and add that start and end date in there so that you can use that Excel look and feel system to be able to update those dates. And if you don't have the worksheet turned on, it's something that you turn on for stages. And once the worksheet's turned on, then you have the ability to have a start and end date column that you then can update and save the whole updates very quickly. So it's a little bit easier from a UI perspective. Okay. And then the third dependency is cost, but cost also factors into this newer feature called the project budgets feature. I have to tell you, when it first came out, I thought it was a great feature, but it did have some performance lag. It's been really improved a lot over the past few months, and I have found an unlimited number of ways to use this project budget. And EVM is actually just one of the many ways. that I've been able to have customers take advantage of this feature. So the project budget feature is not an EVM feature, but you can factor it in and use it as EVM if you'd like. The project budget feature is a way for you to budget costs. And by costs, I mean things like expenses and purchases, but also labor hours and the value or the cost of those hours across the time frame. This is also a newer feature. It came out, I think, about 2.5, 3 years ago as well. You have to enable this, and you turn it on for different stages in your system. Once it's enabled, it gives you the ability to basically schedule out labor costs and hours, expense costs and hours. So it gives you sort of a baselining function of how you plan to spend money on this project. So it goes beyond the hours scheduling. It's a money component to the project, and it is a cost-focused feature natively. There's a lot of bells and whistles inside the project budget that I'll kind of jump into and show you, but what it can give you is it can give you a plan on how you want to spend the hours and a cost on how you want to spend those hours. And that alone can give you that dimension that you're missing if you're only budgeting at the project level. That 16 hours example I gave, if I wanted to plan that 16 hours out, I could use a project budget to give that dimensionality and timeline. Okay. But the project budget feature, I'm going to jump into one of them because I have been using it quite a bit lately. You create a project budget, and there's whole webinars that we can do on just the project budget feature. But the budget feature itself, this version that I've created for this discussion, is at the project level. And I know that because if it was at the task or the phase level, I would have a middle section here that would say task or phase, and then it would say category and subcategory underneath it. Okay. This also gives you the ability to do ETC and EAC. I should let you know that. Let's see if I have that turned on here. Nope, I didn't turn that feature on yet. But what it gives you is the ability to show over time, how do you expect to spend those hours? How do you expect to spend that money? And so if I go into labor, for example, and I'm just going to say I'm going to add OpenAir Consulting, our cost is $85 an hour, and I'm going to work 8 hours for 3 weeks straight. So I'm just going to go from today to the 9th of June. And I hit done. And then what happens is it basically plops in this cost rate for those hours for each of those months. And if I want to change, I got to save it. And I can change my view to say, okay, let me look at it from a weekly basis, because I basically put it in as a month quantity, but I put it in as 3 weeks. If I span it out to the 3 weeks, you can see I have the 680 hours, which should be 8 hours a week for the 3 weeks here. And I can see that also by switching to hours and quantity. And I see the 8 hours a week that I put in that period, right? So it's very quick. I'll just let you know, the reason this is showing all the way back to 2009, that was the start date on the project. So it's smart enough to know that the project start date is for 2009, but I'm putting budgets into 2018. It's a little bit of mismatch of dates there, but that's what I get for doing a live demo. The budget itself gives you the ability to put the hours plan in, factor a cost in there, and now you have a cost that you're showing the burn of that hours, the burn of that cost, which can actually give you a baseline to compute your own earned value, because as you're planning out costs, what's your actual cost, and then the calculations I'm going to show you coming up for EVM, you can actually write your own custom calculations, but not use the EVM feature in OpenAir. Use the project budget feature in OpenAir, because this all has sort of your plan of cost in it. If you haven't used this feature very much, I do actually encourage customers to play around and try this out. It's not very difficult to use, but it does have a lot of upsides. Like if I need to say I'm going to do 12 hours this week and only 4 this week, I can just type in and tab in to the information and update it very quickly. So it's not a big onerous activity to keep this thing up to date. Some customers, I'm encouraging them to use this to come up with their revenue plan for the year. And so they have a project dedicated to holding their budget, which is their revenue plan. So it's all a matter of how you interpret what this dollar value is. Is it cost? Is it revenue? Is it bill rate? Whatever. Okay. So that's a little bit about the project budget feature, but the budget feature really does have that time dimension capability, a total view capability, and it can also help you keep track of, well, how much money did you expect to burn, and did you plan out all 35,000? Right now I've only planned out 2,000. So it gives you a few metrics here that you can kind of keep track and see where you're at. Are you projecting to go over budget, under budget, and so forth? So there is a lot to this feature, and it's a feature that is very versatile to use in a number of ways in the application, which I just showed you this piece of it. Okay. Now, the added bonus to this budget feature, there's a few bonuses. One bonus is that every value that's in this budget, the labor hours, the expenses, the purchases, the total cost, there's a bill rate feature on it. All of those are individually reportable on OpenAir reports, which means now you can pull not only assigned hours or booked hours, you can pull budgeted hours into it. So that's how you can use it in calculations and have it be a baseline or a driver for information. The other benefit of it is it actually is smart enough to bring in actuals to date that are already in the system through your timesheets, through your expense reports, through your purchases, even through your invoicing if you want to bring in your invoice amount. And when you click on a link called Actuals, and it will pull in all of those actuals and display them side by side for each of the categories that you put into your budget. So no longer do you have to write a report that pulls all this stuff in to see where you're at. This actually gives you that information just by a click of a link. And I like that because then you can download it and you can look at that in an analyzed view. You get the ability to bring in only approved or approved and submitted. So it's kind of up to you on how much information you want to bring in regarding the expenses to date. Okay, so this is a little bit of an earned value approach where you're planning out a budget and then you're seeing how the actuals are coming in, and the actuals are cost-based, but there's also, if you spend X number of costs, you're probably earning Y number of revenue. So there's a little bit of that if you compare things side by side. The project budget feature, when it came out, it was a little confusing because there was already a budget feature, and it's called budget. But the budget feature is a revenue-based feature. It is how much money is this project worth, and a lot of standard reporting values in OpenAir basically refer to the budget as far as profitability of budget versus incurred cost or something, and it's using like a revenue amount. And this is the standalone budget feature. They've called it now the transactional budget feature, and that feature basically promotes and stores the budgets on the project properties page. So they're really complementary. I do have many customers, including ourselves, that use both of these to complement each other, because the project budget feature is a time dimension of cost burn, and then the budget feature is sort of a funding document, is the way that I look at it. Okay. Which brings us to earned value. So we have the task plan, we have the schedule. Project budgets are another way to sort of plan things out to understand what you're doing from an earning perspective. But then there's also earned value, just earned value in general. And OpenAir's approach to earned value is to leverage the schedule of your tasks and the plan of costs on your tasks. And you have the ability to identify, if you're using multiple levels of cost, which level of cost is actually the driver for things. And you can even pick the job code as the cost driver. But it all boils down to two key indices. And I talked about this in my general EVM discussion last week, which is a schedule performance index and a cost performance index. So OpenAir does automatically compute this, And all you have to do is turn the feature on. There's really nothing else you have to configure. So if you're curious to see what your projects look like, you could just turn this feature on, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. But the CPI and SPI work together to kind of show you, based on your cost burn, are you projecting that you're going to go over budget, or are you under budget? Are you behind schedule, or are you ahead of schedule? And it's all based on how much cost have I earned versus how much cost should I have earned, and the calculations behind that, which is this area. So to turn the EVM feature on, it's actually a single checkbox. It's not an internal switch. You can turn it on. It doesn't impact any functionality in the system. It's a standalone set of reporting values that can show up in columns as in your list view. So you go into the project settings area. If you're not familiar with that, it's at administration, application settings, project settings. And then in other settings, go all the way to the bottom of the form, all the way to the bottom. And that's where you'll find enable earned value management metrics. And you do have some cost values that you can pick from if you have more than one cost value set up in your system. By designating this, that's where all the base cost per hour is going to be pulled to do your calculation. Okay. But I will tell you, before I kind of show you in the system what the columns and the reporting values look like, you have to, there's 4 key dependencies for earned value to work natively in OpenAir. Okay. If you create your own earned value metrics through custom calculations, then you already know what the dependencies are because you're building the calculation. But when you're using a vendor feature, it may not be clear. So just to highlight, you have to have tasks and schedules of tasks in the system. So those schedules meaning you have to have a start and end date for tasks. You have to have cost per user in the system, or at least a cost per job code, because that job code per user would be driver of the cost. You have to have a plan of hours, so you can't just say the task is going to start on the 5th and end on the 12th and put no hours on it, or something simple like 0.5 hours. If you don't have a realistic plan of hours, it can't compute a cost earnings. So you have to have hours on those tasks to be able to plan those out. And then, of course, you have to have people actually putting time in. So another thing to kind of point out to this earned value management is very much a time-based calculation. So if you wanted to factor in things like the burning of expenses or maybe fixed fee contractors, that would drive you to actually build your own EVM calculations so that you can consider things like expenses and purchases and so forth. So the whole earned value management centers around 3 key values. Planned value, which is the number of hours that you have planned out to burn and the cost of those hours. And the planned value is as of today. So what was the planned value as of today? The earned value is a little bit more calculated. It is a calculation based on what work should have been completed. So how many hours up to this time should have been completed. And then you multiply that by the percentage, and that you multiply that by the total cost that you expect the project to take. And then you have an actual cost, which is total hours worked or approved multiplied by the user's cost, so that these 3 values work together to compute the CPI and the SPI. So OpenAir's translation of these values, those are standard reporting values. The OpenAir's translation is the number of hours assigned to users on tasks multiplied by their cost. The earned value is the percent complete of that task multiplied by the cost, and the actual cost is the timesheet hours approved actually multiplied by the cost. So those 3 values work together to come up with SPI, CPI, SPI. Because if you look at the calculation for SPI, CPI, I'm going to jump backwards here a second. SPI is earned value divided by planned value, and CPI is earned value divided by actual cost, which is these definitions, which gives you these reporting values. So if you turn on EVM, all of these EVM columns are already available in your system right now. And if I take a look at an example we have in our system here, so here's some examples of the planned value, earned value, percent complete, actual cost, CPI, SPI. So you can see some of these are low, some of these are zero. And what zero means is we have a plan, but we haven't executed, or we don't have a plan. So we have plenty of examples in our company where there's really not a schedule of work. It's sort of ad hoc help desk type things. So those don't have really an earned value management component. But delivery projects, deployments, things that we work with you guys on for training and scripting and stuff like that, those all can have a CPI, SPI calculation, and that ratio here, the critical ratio is a combination of how these CPI and SPI relate to each other, right? So I would encourage you to go and just turn it on and take a look at your projects, because I think you would be surprised at, some projects you thought were on track, but they're way off, or some projects that look like they're on track, but they're way off, because that, it all kind of tells you how your schedule looks and how your cost values are in the system. And it's meant to be a proactive management setup in the system for use. Okay. Now, as we wrap up, the EVM variations actually can run the gamut. So there's earned value, great, but then you have to deal with a lot of fixed fee contractors, so you want to factor that in. You can't just factor it in with the standard functionality. You have to write your own custom calculations. But I would challenge you to think about, there's a lot of different ways you can grab that data and create your own calculations for EVM. Things like, instead of using the assigned hours, you use the budgeted hours on the project budget feature. So you're not relying on tasks and dates on tasks and trying to maintain a task plan. You're just keeping that spreadsheet up to date in the project budget, and that's your timeline. That is a great example of how you can redefine what the basis of is for the plan of effort for your plan cost and your earned cost. If you use the baseline functionality, there is a baseline functionality. It captures total plan costs based on the fact that you've scheduled your project plan, or you've assigned people to your project plan. Use that. Have people take baselines and use that to actually capture a base cost that you can use in calculations. And then, of course, there's the whole bookings versus task assignment thing. So if you want to use bookings instead of task assignments, go ahead, but you have to write your own calculations. And then, of course, a lot of different ways to come up with how do you redefine percentage earned versus, what OpenAir is calculating. So we've been fortunate enough, I've been fortunate enough to work with a lot of you in the customer base to kind of come up with variations of EVM, or EVM Lite, or EVM with fixed fee contractors, or EVM, like just different ways to be able to get that management metric under your belt. Okay. So really the budget, you can start with budgeting hours, scheduling those hours, but the EVM really starts taking advantage of a lot of different things combined together. But don't think the EVM feature in OpenAir is the only way to do it. There's lots of ways to skin the cat, so to speak. So definitely feel free to reach out to us, and we would more than be happy to show you different ways to come up with an earned value calculation.